Alright, hello everybody, and welcome to this audio essay. Now to start, I would like to ask all of you to be a little patient with me on here. I have no experience in creating within this format, and whilst talking to myself into a microphone is a relatively similar experience to parenting, I am finding the process a little strange, I gotta say. But after all the feedback I received from the most recent actual podcast I did with Joy over a majority, I figured this format would be more interesting, or at least more well received. Obviously, there are going to be changes as I figure out this whole process, but even so, just making this happen from the initial the idea I had a couple of days ago to now actually recording this, I am realizing how much work is involved in creating all of these. So yeah, do be patient. I'm sort of literally trying to figure out how all of this stuff works, and to make it listenable, I guess. And also, you might pick up on a few background noises here and there. That happens. I am sort of at home, like most of us are, of course. But I am trying my best. I even got myself a little fancy microphone, so hopefully this actually will make it work a little better. So for now, I'm going to be uploading these onto YouTube so that I can share them in the newsletter as I intended. As time goes on, I am going to obviously look into getting these onto platforms like Spotify and so on to make it easier for you all to listen to these. And again, I appreciate your patience with me here. Like, technology just mostly bugs me out, and this is where my, let's call it almost boomer status comes into play. And also another disclaimer, I am going to try and keep the swearing to an absolute minimum, but again, I can't promise you that. So if you are listening to these at work or with your kids or with people who do get offended by swearing, be aware that there might be the occasional swear word in here, because some of the content we are going to be talking about justifies me kind of losing my shit every now and then. Now, the thought process behind all this, behind this format and what I'm trying to do here, I kind of went through all of that in Wednesday's email, I believe. But if you skipped over that part, which I don't blame you. But if you did skip over them, this is the deal, right? So these audio essays will mostly, hopefully come like once a week with your Friday email, and they're meant to supplement the newsletter and the regular hotshots. They're not going to supplant the hotshots that you used to post with them. It's this audio format is meant to sort of replace those, and there's a reason for that. I think supplementing is the wrong word. And again, this is another disclaimer. I'm not editing any of this stuff. A, I'm too lazy for it, and B, I kind of figured let's just raw dog the whole thing and see what happens. And again, this might include background noises, or me fucking with my phone, or me getting a glass of water, and this, that, and the other, just so that you're aware of all this. This isn't going to be a professional podcast or anything like that, unless of course Spotify decides to pay me a fuckload of money and we can start something for real. But for now, this is going to be relatively amateurish. Now, with these hotshots, and this is something I did want to talk about before we get into them for this week, I guess over the last couple of years, I've been screenshotting and sharing takes from Twitter and other websites and stuff about current events and opinions and ideas that I thought were relevant to share with all of you people. Mostly to get a conversation going, to radicalize people, to make people aware of the fact that our current existence is anything but what the people above us are trying to tell us. Fact is, though, over the last 6 or 7 months, I've increasingly felt that sharing all of these opinions without context, without commentary, was becoming more harmful than doing any of the above that I just mentioned. And that's probably one of the main reasons why I've stopped doing it. And then I've kind of figured, well, they are important. It is important to share information, to get the word out there, and to get all the noobs out there to start thinking about the way the world actually works. But even so, or even when I try to do that in the newsletter, the written format just doesn't provide the same framework, I think is the right word for it, to explain all these things. And again, it's mostly opinions, and opinions without commentary and opinions without context can be misappropriated and just are more harmful. So yeah, that's just to give you more context, and that's especially if you skipped Wednesday's email. And again, like, I don't blame you for that, and that's fine. So, the way this works, right, is I'm going to grab my phone in a minute and sort of go through some of the more, let's talk about some of the topics that I found interesting this week. And again, coming back to this format, the way I work, right, and the way shit happens for me at my end is that I don't sit at home alone and scroll through Twitter and go, oh, okay, this could be interesting to share this and the other. No. So what actually happens is that the majority of the days I sit here and I cook with friends, and we talk and we sit in our kitchen and we drink, and that's how this entire discourse shapes the information and then shapes the context and the content that I share with you through the newsletter and through my social media and this and the other. And that's kind of where I'm aiming for this format to go to. Again, that's probably one of the main reasons why I don't want to edit this or add jingles and make music and all this crap. No, I kind of want to recreate that vibe of us sitting in my kitchen where I can cook, and we drink and we talk shit. And this is kind of where I'm hoping for this to go also. And yeah, I hope that works. I don't know. We'll see. And so to get started on what's been going on this week, that's kind of been grabbing my attention, is obviously I record this and I write the Friday newsletter or any newsletter the day before I send it out to you. And then today, obviously, is January 6th. And a year ago, a bunch of lunatics, tried to storm the U.S. Capitol, which is, to this day, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. It kind of just, not only does it crack me up, but it doesn't, the one hand, it doesn't surprise me. And I think feigning any sort of surprise and framing it as an attack on democracy is total bullshit. But nonetheless, it is January 6th, and we're here like a year later, and my inbox and my social media has been flooded with a lot of the bullshit. Let's call it liberal, or let's call it just whatever, brainwashed takes on all this stuff. Where you get words thrown around like, yeah, it was an attack on democracy, it was a coup, it was this, it was that, and at the end of the day, or the way I look at it, is, well, it wasn't surprising. Like, for one, we don't have, there is no real democracy in any of the Western countries that we exist in. That's point one. Point two being that attack, and I'm sort of using my hands to show parentheses here, because, yeah, sure, it was an attack, but, it was anything unlike the coups the US or the West has done anywhere else in the world. Well, so yeah, I don't think it was surprising at all. It was sort of the natural, expected resolution after 4 years of Trump and 50 years of bullshit politics in the U.S. And this, obviously, this could have happened in Germany, or this could have happened in the UK, or anywhere else in Europe. But it did happen there, and it's a year ago, and here we are. And I think one of the main takes we can take from all of that is that to this day, none of the people responsible, and we all know who they are, haven't been indicted. They haven't been put to jail. And that's really all you need to know about all of this. Sure, see a few of the so-called people involved in actually storming this, the Capitol are in prison or are going to prison and this, that, and the other. But the people who literally were orchestrating this, who were working this coup to actually try and overthrow the U.S. government, as crazy as that sounds, they're still walking free, and they won't go to prison. I seriously doubt that Trump or any of his little fucking minions will face jail time for this stuff. And that's kind of the only take that you need to take away from this. It doesn't really matter who would have been in charge. It would have been, the Republicans or the Democrats or whoever else. No one's interested in indicting or putting away their fellow class members. Of course they're not. That's never going to happen. But nonetheless, it's been a year, and here we are, and nothing's really happened. And yeah, you are going to see a lot of interesting takes on this. I think it's valuable to just keep that in mind, that, yeah, all of those motherfuckers are going to walk free, and the people who were, I guess, brainwashed or abused or whatever you want to call it to actually go and storm the damn building, they'll face jail time. And that's kind of, you can apply that analogy to whatever wars we fought, whatever, yeah, whatever. It's again, like, once again, don't want to kick off with like a genuine class analysis, but here we are. It's the rich fucking with the poor, and around. But this is actually well, that's saying that. That's an interesting part. There's been a few studies that I've read over the last couple of months in regards to actually took part in these in that so-called attack, and even though a lot of interested parties are interested in framing that group of people as dumb and white trash and this that, and the other. That study has found out that they're not. That there were well-informed, relatively well-off people getting in on this, which is also a very interesting aspect to this all. So the usual narrative of some sort of elite, no matter God, I hate that word, but some sort of like elite brainwashing and then directing the mob to do their bidding doesn't actually hold true here. What to make of that? I don't know. There's plenty of takes on that. I don't want to go as far as comparing it to the situation we had in the 20s and 30s here in Germany, but there are similarities that are worth noting. So again, I think that's something worth your time to think about when obviously you're getting bombarded with all of this bullshit today, or tomorrow for that matter of fact. And again, so that's all I got to say about January 6th. It's a huge media event at this point, and there isn't really much to say about it. The other take, or the other a point I wanted to make goes back to my home country, England, right? So over the last couple of weeks, there's been, obviously our country back there is falling apart thanks to the most corrupt and blatant inept leadership from the Tory government that we've had over there for the last 10 years. But there's been 2 points in the last couple of days or a couple of weeks that have stood out for me most. And one being that Tony Blair, the previous prime minister from my youth, was being suggested for an OBE, or essentially getting a knighthood. And then the second one being that the Bristol Four, the Colston Four, I think as of today or even yesterday, were not sentenced for throwing a statue of a slave owner and a slave trader into the Bristol port. So, one, Tony Blair getting an OBE, again, hardly fucking surprising. Again, it's the establishment in the UK, which is extremely classist for anybody who doesn't live there, awarding one of their own for being a fucking war criminal. Yes, he has not been convicted of that title. As far as I'm concerned, he is. He got us into a war in Iraq in 2004 that killed millions of people based on lies. And for anybody not old enough to remember those days, that was pretty bad. I remember the Million Man March in London going up to Parliament, and Tony Blair literally just ignoring that and going, yeah, my religion or my God has said that this is a worthwhile thing, and then we should also ally with the US to bomb the shit out of a country that had nothing to do with 9/11 and kill a bunch of people and enrich our friends. So him getting an OBE, or him being suggested for an OBE, yes, it's gross and it's wrong, and people like that shouldn't be rewarded at all. But yet again, it's hard. It shouldn't come as a surprise at all. It's the royal establishment in the United Kingdom awarding one of their own, and awarding one of the people that has done everything in his power to uphold our extremely racist and sexist and imperialistic class structure system in the UK. The only funny thing about all that there's an online petition going on to, I think, it's an online petition in England right now that basically collects signatures to not give him his OB, which obviously isn't going to happen. But I think it reached something like 750,000 signatures in like 3 or 4 days, which is kind of hilarious. And I hope he knows about it, and I hope he feels really shitty about that. Obviously, the ideal situation would be for him to end up in jail and rot in hell, but we shall see about that. Now, on a positive note, you all might remember last summer when, in the context of the Black Lives Matter protests in the US and across Europe and in the rest of the world, a group of people got together in Bristol and tore down a statue of an extremely wealthy slave trader, who had, at his time of his death, donated a bunch of money to the city of Bristol, and they had the statue put up there. What happened? Like as in so many other cities, that statue was torn down and thrown into the port. It was fucking great as far as I'm concerned. And, again, historically speaking, or even academically speaking, there's been so many studies about that person named Edward Colston that have laid out the facts where, for example, I think he was personally, or him and his company were personally responsible for transporting something over 80,000 people from Africa to the Caribbean, where, they were chained and beaten and raped, and over 20,000 of them having died en route. And that's a small glimpse into the reality of the slave trade that England was a huge part of. And, in true imperialistic nature, our country, or our government has ignored for a long, long time. Now, the most logical thing is to remove that statue. The fact that, it was done through a protest and then torn down and thrown into the port makes me personally extremely happy. But nonetheless, of course, the people identified being responsible for this were put to court. Of course they were. Shocking, again, not shocking, but shocking in parentheses, as that is. And the only good news is that I think it was today, maybe it was yesterday, or even the day before, but they basically weren't found guilty of any sort of criminal behavior, which is wonderful. I'm really happy for that. I'm glad that thing happened, and cool. Just stoked that that they got off. I was expecting them to be indicted, and they weren't, which is so cool. So that's the news from home, I guess, or my so-called home, even though I've lived in this country for way longer than I dare to remember. But so those 2 points are from England. Now, another thing that I picked up, and it's totally off subject, but I think it popped up yesterday, is there was an article in pretty much every Western media outlet about Pope Francis, right? So the Catholic Pope, and he's generally viewed as this positive contributing factor to the Catholic religion and the Catholic institution by voicing some relatively, let's call them socialist ideas about inequality and wealth, which is, let's call it ironic considering the amount of wealth that they sit on and how they got it. But yesterday, or I think it was the day before yesterday, he dropped a typical, let's call it, I don't want to say Catholic, but let's call it a institutional line that just, shit like that just drives me fucking crazy. In which he basically criticized couples who choose to have pets instead of children as selfish, and arguing that the decision to forego parenthood leads to a loss of, and I quote, humanity and is a detriment to civilization. Now, coming from a person that's celibate and promotes mostly, not anymore through violence, but violence, a heteronormative relationship status where having kids is, especially these days, your prime reason for getting married and being in a relationship. Holy shit. Again, read the room, my dude. That's one thing I don't get it. He'll drop some statement and he'll drop a few words where even I go, and I'm being an ex-Catholic, being a staunch opponent to the entire institution of that church. But he'll say things. So I'm like, you know what? That's on point, dude. Capitalism will fuck all of us to hell and back. And you see that, and you use your voice to criticize that, and that's a good thing. And he gets involved in the climate debate. He gets involved in criticizing the obscene economic model that we all exist under. And then again, he comes out and drops shit like that, and it just makes me scratch my head. And it makes you wonder, okay, so what part of this, what part of these statements, are real and which ones are played? Is he saying this to appease his base within the Vatican, or is that how he thinks about it? I don't know, but for fuck's sake, things like that aren't going to be helping. And again, being an atheist and being who I am, yes, I oppose that institution, but let's be realistic. That dude is the head of a religion that sits on 2-3 billion people on this planet, and what he says people listen to, and that is just oof. I think, again, if I would have posted this on Instagram or on the news, that I probably would have written 2 or 3 pages on it, but within this format. And again, I don't want to swear too much. Let's just leave it at that. That statement and that entire vibe, man, that's off. And what a douchebag for saying so. I'm just not happy. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on today, and this kind of ties into the pandemic and the last few emails that I've sent out to you guys is, and it relates specifically to Europe, and I'm sure this is happening in the U.S. or North America as well, but specifically about Europe, there's been a couple articles in sort of more in the left-wing press about airplane companies or airline companies like British Airways, the German Lufthansa, every national carrier in this and the other, where because of the pandemic and people not flying and our air aviation regulatory systems and this and the other, they're enforcing it. Sorry if you heard that. That was my doorbell in the background. So I kind of lost my train of thought there. All right, so what's happening is because of the pandemic, people aren't flying, rightfully so, and we have an aviation regulatory body in our European government that says an airline has to fly a certain amount of flights to retain their flight status at certain airports. And the absurdity of bureaucracy is, because no one's flying, at this time, we have something of around 10,000 flights a day flying empty across Europe, so these airline companies can retain their flight status. Again, like that, I've been reading into this all day long, and it's just, I'm absolutely fucking flabbergasted at that reality. Like, rather than, for the Air Regulatory Commission or whatever the fuck they're called, to say, hey, it's a pandemic, no one's flying, dear airline companies, we know that you are not transporting people. If you want to retain your flight status, it's cool. Like, we can just take a break for 6 months, and when this shit is over, whenever that will be, we will have to go back to this, that, and the other. But for the time being, there's no point in you guys flying 5,000 to 10,000 airplanes a day across Europe empty, which doesn't make sense. No one's made that call, and these airlines are flying airplanes across Europe, and I'm sure this is happening all over the place, fucking empty. And I don't need to get into how much one airplane pollutes the fucking air in comparison to, you using a wooden straw rather than a plastic one. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but you get the gross example here. And I don't know. It's. I've been trying to read more into it, and I think obviously these airline companies are not promoting that sort of information, but under certain freedom of information acts here in Europe, that information is out there, and it's just what. It literally makes your head scratch. Again, and I think it's just an illustrative example of how we as individuals are being forced to shoulder the blame of an institutional problem. When we're talking, for example, about climate change or pollution for that matter, when you have an industry that is so, well, I don't want to say guilty, but, well, yeah, I guess they are guilty, but they're responsible for a huge amount of CO2 emissions because of flying these planes. And all you're hearing is that avoiding climate change or sort of averting climate change comes down to individualistic choices. And then you see these figures. There is no other option other than going, what in the flying fuck, man? I mean, that was my first impression. I saw these numbers and I went, wait, what? That can't be for real. Like, this literally cannot be happening. And it comes down to, again, bureaucracies being overbloated, no one wanted to take responsibility, and again, corruption. There's so much money involved in this business where money's going from left and right without ending where it should do. And you have the fact of I think it's up to 10,000 planes a day flying across Europe, goddamn empty. Like, I'm so stunned at this point that I'm almost running out of fucking ways to say this without jumping out of my chair and screaming out loud. Again, trying to get that across more professionally, it's a systemic issue. It's not down to you and me. Obviously, you and I have to do everything in our power to do so, but be fully aware that us all going vegan and us all avoiding plastic doesn't do shit in comparison to changing that corruption within this system. That's, I think that's the point that I was getting to. And of course, well, I'm just looking at the time. We're already at 25 minutes. Fuck, I expected this to be a lot shorter than that. So, with that, I think that's where I am going to leave it for this first episode. Obviously, I'm still going to have to upload all this stuff and make that happen and write the rest of the newsletter. So, I hope that's it for today, or for this week, as a matter of fact. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm getting more comfortable talking to myself into a microphone, and we'll see how next week goes. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you all next week.